Because I know Bonnie and Diana grew up on the prairie, and you abuse that range and you're done. You are out of business. And so you think of it that way, that you always take half of the production, you leave half to go back to the soil. So we have to, how do we do that with cropland? And that's what we have to keep in mind. And then, yeah, the diversity of the plant community in the rangeland, we got to have that either in crop rotations or in cover crops and multi-species. And we touched on that again. 3 years of putting those practices in will turn that around. It is not as slow as we've been led to believe. Making topsoil is kind of a term you can get into the weeds on. We're making organic matter, which some of that organic matter, because of biology, will become mineral-attached organic matter, which is what we would define as true topsoil, as scientists would call it. And that takes a while, but biology will speed that up. Organic matter, we can jump organic matter, and perennials are a big part of that solution. Because, again, going back to native prairies, are mainly perennial based. There's some biennials and some annuals, but and then just look at the color in those two. It just.
So when you buy topsoil in a bag, are you really getting topsoil, or you're just?
That's a good question. I don't know that. I don't know that for sure. You're probably just getting a composted mix of something.
I got a pallet full of it.
Yeah, well, you'll find out. But here's an interesting thing. So 1% of topsoil is 20 tons of carbon. So we know that we have that as an environmental issue, right? 1%. I've moved that field at soil you saw from 4.2, this year it was 7. And I'm producing at a high production level that's serving me. The energy flow from the sun into the soil, that, I talked to the soil scientist that's world renowned, and it's counterintuitive because I've always been told if you take all that biomass away, you're taking all that from the soil. And she said, well, yeah, that's correct, but she said, your soils are functioning at such a level. And think of it, another way to think of it, when you're in shape physically, you don't need as much food to do the same thing as when you're out of shape and trying to do something. And that's the way the soil is too. If you've got that thing in shape, it will overperform, and so I'm sequestering carbon like no other. The other thing about organic matter is 1% organic matter will hold 1 inch of water per acre. And from an irrigator point of view, that's huge. So if I've got 7% organic matter, I can hold 7 inches worth of water. I can raise a crop on that, a hay crop on 7 inches of water, easy, without having to irrigate. Or irrigate less, which again is another savings.
Yeah.
There. It just, from a farming point of view, you're looking at ways to minimize input costs. And it's just incredible. So then you've got all that carbon in there, and guess what the biology does? It just keeps exponentiating in weight. So those worms are turning over all that for me. That's a huge part of that. And then the biology is eating that. Whoops, I jumped ahead too far. And we have to, we're trying to look at those things, what we're up against. Our carrying capacity as a world is going to get challenged here. We're going to be over 9 billion people, by 2050. That's not that far away. And any rancher knows about carrying capacity, putting too many cows out there. Well, then, you know, if there's no food and they start to fight, well, guess what's gonna happen to us if we don't get this figured out? And that goes back to ancient times, that, you know, when agriculture and food, and in Africa, they still struggle with that. I mean, there's over 1 million people starving to death in the world every day. That shouldn't be. You know, and so we look at how much farmland we're losing because we're putting, you know, asphalt on it or whatever. And we see this, you know, there's those worms. It's just, these guys are doing all that tilling for us. We do not have to sit in a tractor and buy diesel fuel to do that. And this is some of this forage winter wheat that we raise as a feed crop, but we also combine it, and you can see how tall that is. It's almost 4 feet tall. And we cut that at 2 feet when we combine it. And so we're leaving 2 feet of stubble. And then we bale it, and we make straw, and we use that straw, and then it'll end up back out there. But 2 feet of stubble, one inch is 250 pounds of biomass. So even 20 inches then, I'm at 5,000 pounds of biomass, 2.5 tons that I'm putting back to the ground. And it's keeping it covered. It's not getting exposed to those elements. Your production costs we touched on. You're protecting your natural resources, air, water, wildlife, just go through them all by doing that. And we can, like you saw, healthy soils to reduce nutrient loading and sediment runoff. Well, I don't know how you argue with what you saw out there. I mean, that's that black one. Why we're not changing, I don't get
So is FSA in on helping people? Because part of the reason why people overgraze and overdo is because they have a bank payment they gotta make.
Correct, you're exactly right. And some of those supports that they put in to help ranchers during droughts are not rewarding good behavior.
Yeah.
Right. That's the honest truth. And I had to write, when I was in extension, I had to write reports about the difference between a normal production year and a drought year in different counties. And a lot of it was man-caused. You create your own drought because you took more than half. You took more than half, then you took more, you're taking organic matter away, so you're not holding as much moisture. You took stubble away. You know, if you're grazing it from here instead of, down to here instead of here, a lot of our snow catch is huge in keeping the soil insulated from losing moisture, let alone adding to it.
Because I think that if you could probably say all farmers and ranchers, they all want to have a healthy land base.
Yes,
but a lot of it, most of the time why they don't want to change is because they can't afford it.
We put ourselves in positions
their prices are from the 1940s.
Yes.
Production costs are going up all the time.
We have no
and that's
control
why
over price.
I'm hoping that if FSA could help us.
Well, they do through the form of the NRCS, like TANT, in the programs they have. They will incentivize you to put in grazing systems and to do all the things that we just talked about. They will incentivize that in cost shares to change your practices. And a lot of ranchers are doing it anyway. Bonnie and Diana can talk about that too. I mean, we just know that anybody that was overgrazing wasn't going to be there very long.
Yeah, you know, we think about our dad, he just naturally knew.
Well, he knew. I've overgrazed, and I've paid for it in, you know, production the next years.
Yeah,
it's
a snowball.
It is, and we're not, you know, in eastern South Dakota, they get 25 inches of rain. We get 15. And half of that, more than half of that comes in April, May, June. So what's worrying me right now, we're halfway into April, and the forecast isn't showing a lot of rain. And last year we got saved because we had this little 2-3 week window at the end of May, June, that stayed cool and we got moisture. And we
I
grew
always
grass.
have this rule in the last like 10 years is that I'm not gonna worry about a drought until the end of June.
That's right.
Because I know that a lot of rain can come.
That's correct. April, May, June, or
End of June.
in this country is when everything's made. I was always taught, you don't go out to your natives until June. Because what you're gonna have the 1st of June is what you're gonna have for the rest of the year. And sometimes it get more after that, but otherwise I was staying on my non-natives, my crested weeds and my alfalfa fields and that stuff, and just camping on that, but, we've talked about a bunch of this, and I touched on holding that water. That's a huge part. Every inch of water we can hold is gonna serve us out here. It's gonna keep the soil alive, it's gonna keep everything functioning. And even though you might not grow much, those plants, like western wheatgrass, which is what made this country, it's native, it's here for a reason, all those thousands of years, buffalo on it, antelope on it, it's the one that's here because it fits this environment. And you can determine how much grass you're gonna have next summer based on how much rain you had in October, in November, in December. Because it's what we're talking about. Those plants are sitting there going, okay, I'm going into winter, I don't got a lot of moisture, so western wheatgrass will grow this tall every year. But in wet years, the grasses will be this far apart. In dry years, it'll be this far apart. So it may look like you've got a lot of grass out there until you walk out and look down and they're spaced. Plants are just uncanny on their ability to figure it out. And it's all that deal making that's going on, and it's moisture driven. And comparing these two, and this wasn't my doing, this is Gabe Brown's up in Bismarck, and some of you might know him. That's the difference in what you can do when you work on these principles. And so what is our future going to be? We're going to move back to the way man had to do it when they started out. You've got to live within nature. The Native Americans knew it. They had to teach us how to do it because those settlements almost starved to death. They didn't know how to feed themselves. And the Native Americans have one system, not all the tribes, but a lot of them. Have you heard of the Three Sisters? The Three Sisters are you plant pumpkins, corn, and beans together. Same amount. Pumpkins cover the ground and keep the weeds out. Corn's the grass, and it's going to make that corn, right? But what does grass love for nutrient? Nitrogen. And who's making the nitrogen? The beans. They had that figured out 1,000 years ago. You're working within nature. And why are we fighting it? And again, I don't want to villainize what farmers are doing now. It was what we knew to do and how we brought it along, but it's not going to last. It's not going to last for my kids or my grandkids, just from a profitability, survivability point of view, let alone an environmental point of view.
Well, what they did in this country, it was fairly new because, like I'm thinking back in Europe, they probably had smaller farms, so they plowed it.
Yeah,
And
we
then
don't
they
have
come
enough
over
time to talk
here
about that.
and they have just acres
They
and
just
acres.
spoiled those soils.
So they just
And
plowed
they're
it all
still
up.
doing it in some spots. Around those castles and those fiefdoms, the aristocracy controlled the farmers.
Yeah.
They were serfs, and the farmers owned nothing, and everything they raised went to the And then they meter back out and they just despoiled those soils, and just, some of them, they still haven't recovered around here. And then, yes, then they come here and you've got these untouched pristine soils, and we're despoiling them again. We're just, and it's all washing down, washing away. And we can change it, you know, nature is forgiving, that's the beauty thing. And that's another thing that really warms my heart is we can turn this around. I can do it on my place. If nobody else is gonna do it, I'm gonna do it on my place. And what's interesting then is the feed that I'm feeding my livestock is higher nutrition levels. I don't need as much mineral. We don't have to, sheep are notorious for getting worms. The way we rotate, I don't have to use parasitides. And it's just all those things go away. And then guess what? You're happier. And you're not taking your stress out on your family. They're happier. And then that whole thing, that's that holistic deal. It just.
And your sheep are happier.
What's that?
Your sheep are happier.
Oh,
They
absolutely.
don't have
Healthy
to
sheep.
be warmed and you don't have to
They're
run.
more nutrient dense in their meat composition.
Yeah.
And so, and I had to learn all this the hard way. I had to go through all the conventional thoughts and do it all those ways, and it wasn't working for me, and it wasn't happy. And livestock are part of that deal, which a lot of people don't think about. So those are those 5 things again. Oops. And then it's just thinking about nature. And we don't have to know it all. We just have to mimic what was here. It is silly to be raising corn out here. This is not tall, warm season grass country. This is short grass prairie. So let's raise short grasses, cool seasons. Use your wheats and your barleys and your oats. You can put your sorghums in if you've got, you know, because they're set up for some of that. But we are not sustainable raising corn out here. It is just a silly idea to do that. It is. It just doesn't fit our environment.
What about beans?
Beans,
Soybeans?
they don't fit here. They're, you know, they're cool. Well, they're not. They've been bred so different, but you can put them in my cover crops, one of the best ones that graze well are soybeans. So when I do a cover crop, I think of 80% of it is going to be grass, just like my prairie. And then 15% is going to be forbs, and 5% is going to be legumes, just like my prairie. And so one of a legume, soybeans.
Yeah.
And I've grazed soybeans before, and livestock do well on it. So, and we're in infancy on this. We're, like I said, if we can put some money into understanding this, this country out here has been called an economic burden to our nation because we have to have so many government supports. If we can sequester that carbon like I know we could be a GDP, a gross domestic product driver out here. We can flip that thing around and we can be strength to this country. And so, yeah, less energy is used, more drought tolerance, reduced disease, improved sustainability, improved plant health, which then goes to the animals, which then goes to us. So we should have less issues with human health. I don't know why some people fight that so bad, other than, to be kind of ornery is, it's money driven. Corporate America and ag businesses are in business to make money. And how do they do that? They sell fertilizer, they sell chemicals. But they're changing, some of them are, they're moving some of these ways. This blows my mind, and I still have a hard time believing it, and I keep asking them, and it's 1,700 insect species for every one pest. that will eat that one pest. So when we go back to our weeds deal and some of those things, we can combat that naturally. We
Who's
just,
in that picture?
those are spider webs.
Sure, spider webs.
That shows
First I thought they were
rangeland
sage
health.
grouse.
I have a
Did you?
picture in another presentation. My alfalfa field looks like that in the fall. So I'm saying, I've got
Spiders
spiders in my field, and what's that telling me? There's also, I've found out that earthworms exude an enzyme that alfalfa takes up that keeps weevils away. I got spiders eating weevils, got earthworms keeping weevils away. I don't have to use chemicals. It just, and so again, minimal disturbance, we can do it. That's the way our fields look. We armor the soil. We showed you that. That's what happens when you don't keep the soil covered. You're just exploding that. This one we didn't talk about, but it's huge. What temperature do you like it in your house? 70, 80 degrees? My mom loves 80.
That happens when you get older
Yeah,
sometimes.
I think so. That's the same temperatures we like is what the soil likes. Is that an accident? That's ideal living. When you go over 100, they start dying. You get in bare soil in the middle of summer, 140, you killed them all. You just you cooked them, bare soil. What are we doing? What are we doing? It's just, you know, that shows you that deal. You just, that alone will tell you to keep it covered. Keep the direct sunlight off that soil. We saw it on the water, but yet we've been conditioned, and it was the best thing at that time for what we knew. So, you know, I don't want to beat anybody up. I tilled too. And those are cover crops coming back into that. And then you can graze that. And so then again, less feed that you have to put in a bale, less diesel you have to run through your tractor.
So the green is planted intentionally?
Yes. Those are cover crops, right? As soon as you can, we'll do it. If I got somebody to run the drill when I'm combining, that's what's gonna happen.
Right behind you.
So you don't lose any moisture. And it only takes a quarter inch and that stuff's coming. Because all that stubble and all that organic matter is holding that right there, and that's all it needs to get started. And then it's just unbelievable. But then diversity. The monocultures just cause us problems because the insects figure it out. And then livestock. Again, enzymes in their saliva will stimulate plants to start again. And every time you mow or you graze, the root hairs that supported that foliage on top, they die. Well, what do they become? Carbon. And then it uses energy to put out new root hairs. It makes new deals, and it just keeps going. And that's where you get that overperforming deal, is because of that. And diversity in livestock. Cows eat grass. Sheep and goats love forbs and woodies. And they'll both eat a little bit of the other, but why is 80% of the prairie grass? Because the biggest animal on the prairie was a buffalo, and guess what he needed to eat? A lot. And then you have your deer and your antelope. Well, we're just mimicking nature by using different species. And there's our dung beetle friends, and that's a whole new thing too. I mean, you can build these little pop bottle traps and catch them and then identify them. It's great kid stuff. Yeah. So I won't get into all that, but it's a lot of what I said. We're just reducing input costs. We're making predictable outcomes that we can go to our banker and tell them, this is, yeah, we can do that. And then this is all that extra stuff besides surviving as a rancher. We are going to be a solution to a lot of our environmental problems if we can get worldwide on board on this. We can pull, if everybody grazed an area the size of Australia in what we call a pulse grazing, where we're saying you're going in and you're hitting it and you're taking a little less than half and you're leaving more leaf, we can sequester all the carbon emitted by that occurred since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. We have that power to do that, and it's just coming. More and more people are getting it now. But that, you know, at the end of it, that's the quality of life. If we have that, we can have a greater carrying capacity. So for me, it's just, that's what I want my kids. I want them to live like this.
Yeah, because it's an answer to like endangered species too.
Yes, yeah.
There's some hope to
We
save
have-
them.
World Wildlife Fund came out and did a survey, a bird survey on our place. There was 13 species that are threatened that are on our place, they found. Either they identify it as a threat or the South Dakota Game Fishing Parks, 13 birds. And I wasn't trying to do that. That's how nature recovers. It's just amazing. So that's kind of where we're at with all this stuff. That's my youngest when he was little, but that's a rapeseed, that plant is, the cousin to canola. But you can just see that old gnarly root, that's what I like. That's my soil conditioner, that's my plow or my shovel. And then that dies, and that all goes back to the soil. And the sheep eat the top part. That becomes red meat. So, any questions?
So what would, it seems like the big thing now is aquaponic and that kind of, I mean, how do you see that kind of farming or whatever?
Hydroponics and aquaponics is not gonna improve anything. And it's probably, a lot of those systems don't have the nutrient density in their foodstuffs either. Some of those are, they thought were solutions because of loss of farmland, and in like Japan, it's big because of, you know, they just don't have the farm ground and they're dependent, so they're trying to do it that way. But it's a stopgap, I'd say that, but it's.
I often think that it takes, you gotta be pumping water,
Well,
which is energy.
yes, you gotta go back to energy, that's what I was gonna say. Energy is your question mark. And where does that come from? That comes from the sun. So what can you do to capture that energy from the sun and put it into the soil and then bring it back out as you need it? That's what people gotta do, that's what they gotta get to. We are energy collectors. So it's just changing that paradigm of what that agriculture is.
What were you gonna ask, Diana?
Well, did some of the information get gleaned from what they were first learning about how bison graze the prairie? I mean, is that kind of the start of
Yeah.
this thinking?
Some of it, there's a whole bunch of different people that have come to this in different directions. But for us, the gold standard to measure whether you've arrived in soil health is against the native prairie. That's why Tance was showing you that. That's the gold standard. And you can make your cropland function like that. It's not the same, but it's a lot closer than anything else we're doing. But yes, they look back at, all those things, Lewis and Clark and Audubon and any of those people and what they wrote about. You hear the stories of how right in eastern South Dakota and the Indian grass and big blue stem was as tall as a horse's back. And, well, those are warm seasons, and you can mimic that with corn, but corn's an annual. Perennials are your real answer. They are just powerhouses for putting things back to the soil. Yeah, no, there's a Japanese guy, and he did this in the early 1900s, Fukado Musunabu, I'm killing his name. He just made a whole closed system of this. And again, he was leading that's in the early 1900s, and he wrote a book about it. And this whole system. Alan Savory, you probably heard about him and the stuff he's doing. There's a guy down in Mexico, Alejandro Camarillo, I'm horrible on these names. He's just taken a desert ranch and he's got grasses tall in a 6-inch rainfall. It works. And so those guys are brash enough to go out there and really put these things to the test. Just incredible. So there is a future to our environment and to our world, and all is not lost by any means. We can turn this around. And there's a lot of excited people doing it.